Chapter 4, 21st of December 1908. Sandy came around slowly and, without opening her eyes, her fingers searched the contours of her forehead, wincing when she found a tender lump where something had quite definitely hit her on the head. Her fingers travelled to the right cheek, which felt bruised. What had just happened? 1 minute she had been in an old music hall, and the next minute she had been falling as if the floor had quite literally disappeared from underneath her, and she had landed in... Well, that was the thing. Where had she landed? All she could remember was a blinding light, cacophony of terrible smells, thick eye-watering smoke, and a roaring sound like hundreds of people yelling, cheering and stamping. She must have dreamt it, though her bruised face and bump on her forehead told her different. Had she actually fallen through a hole in the floor and bumped it? Tentatively, she opened her eyes. She was in a gloomy office, lit by a small flickering lights, with an old-fashioned leather-topped wooden desk, an old-fashioned wooden chair. The desk was very neatly laid out with a wire tray full of letters, a bottle of ink and a fountain pen lying in a black oblong tray, an antique candlestick telephone and a wooden box with numbers on it, which on closer inspection Sandy realised was a calendar displaying the date 21st December 1908. She could hear the sound of horses' hooves as a constant clip-clop from outside, the occasional park of a vintage car horn, and the sound of voices shouting and cheering. The latter seemed to be coming from somewhere on the other side of the office door. What she didn't hear was buses, cars and sirens, which you always heard in the city centre. She got shakily to her feet, walked the couple of steps to the window and gazed out onto an unbelievable scene below. The street was, without a doubt, the Trongate, but there was no sign of the minibus that she had travelled therein, or the modern street lamps which had washed the pavements with their bluish-white glow. Instead, pools of amber light flickered here and there, cast by the sort of lamps that lit the way in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Wires stretched across the street from building to building in zigzagging lines, and old-fashioned trams trundled along beneath them. A constant stream of horse-drawn carts and carriages and the occasional vintage car, their small headlamps like pale yellow smudges in the thick fog-filled night, replaced the usual flow of motorised traffic. It had been cold and clear when they had arrived earlier that night. Earlier tonight? She thought to herself. I only got here earlier tonight. How can the whole street have changed so much in just a few hours? Was she still dreaming? She pinched herself to make sure, the sharp pain confirming that she wasn't. The street below was fascinating, like the set of a costume drama. That must be it, she thought. They're making a film. Last year, Sandy had seen a film being made in George Square. They'd blocked off the whole area to modern traffic and made it look like it had done in the Victorian days, with horse-drawn carriages and people in fancy costumes. That must be what she saw now, out of the window. The Trongate of the 21st century, made up to look like it would have done 100 years ago. It was the only logical reason for the radical change outside. But it looked so real, right down to the thick fog. The door to the small old-fashioned office opened, and in walked a red-faced little man with a moustache twisted into neat points that turned up at the ends. He wore glasses, a bowler hat and a tweed three-piece suit. Albert? She said tentatively. He looked like a much younger version of the man who had told them all about the music hall. In fact, apart from the lack of grey hair and wrinkles, they were identical. The man flashed her an angry look. That's Mr. Pickard to you, boy, he barked, as he stood with his arms folded and glared at her. Who in blazes do you think you are? Sandy was stunned. Boy? He called her a boy. So she had short hair, but so did a lot of girls. She'd never been called a boy before. She was obviously a girl. Well, boy? Sandy felt a prickle of annoyance and was going to correct him for his mistake. But her mouth just didn't follow her brain. Instead, she found herself apologising. Sorry, sir. I just woke up here a moment ago. I think I must have fainted or something, she answered honestly, rubbing the lump on her forehead. I think I hit my head. How could she have thought that this man was old Albert? Albert had seemed such a nice, gentle man. Maybe he was Albert's son or something. The man looked her up and down with a puzzled, slightly repulsed expression on his face, as if he had never seen anything quite like her before. Sandy felt uncomfortable under his scrutiny and squirmed. Judging by the strange costume and the way you arrived on stage, I take it you're a young magician that decided he was going to make his debut on my stage today unannounced and ruin my show. Now, young man, that isn't the way you go about things, though I hear from my staff that it was quite spectacular entrance and you scared off the useless act that was on before you. Costume? Stage debut? Sandy thought. What's he on about? I'm not a magician, sir. I'm with the school party doing the ghost hunt, she said a little uncertainly. What are you talking about, lad? School party? Ghost hunt? Is this some kind of new act? Do you perform some kind of ghost show? If you want me to book you, lad, then you can go through the usual procedures and audition like everyone else, he growled, still eyeing Sandy sceptically. Come back tomorrow morning at 11 and don't be late. I want to see your ghost show. You impressed my stage manager, and that's no easy task. The man stepped over to the door and held it open. What's your name, boy? He asked. Sandy, she muttered as she approached the open door. She was going to say, and I'm a girl, but once again her mouth did not agree with her brain, and she ran through the open door instead, desperate to get away from this weird, rude man and find her classmates. Outside the small office was a short corridor which led back to the music hall. However, as she entered the music hall, nothing was quite as she remembered it. The crumbling auditorium, which had been empty except for sleeping classmates, teachers and parents, was now completely crammed with costumed people who sat or stood intently watching the black and white silent film. The decor was renewed, not a peeling layer or hole in the plaster to be seen, and the dirty yellow and brown ceiling was now a midnight blue sky, scattered with hundreds of gold stars lit by circular lights that hung from the centre of the high ceiling. Sandy wove her way through the dense crowd, sure that her friends would be somewhere in the middle. Mr. Oakley must have organised for her class to be extras in the film as a surprise. They'd only just finished studying the Victorians and Edwardians, and he had constantly gone on about the smell and how people today wouldn't be able to stand the pong. Well, whoever the film's director was, they were certainly going for realism. The smell was rotten, really stinking and full of tobacco smoke that stung her eyes. It was too realistic. It was making Sandy feel sick. All thoughts of her classmates were instantly forgotten and replaced with a desperate need to find a way out into the fresh air before she threw up everywhere. She turned around and pushed her way back through the noisy, packed, stinking music hall with both hands firmly clasped over her mouth. Finally, with some relief, she found her way to a staircase and made her way down to a small foyer and ticket office. She dashed across to a set of large wooden doors, which she pushed open and stepped onto the street outside. She took her hands away from her mouth and, with the prospect of fresh air, took in a deep breath and instantly regretted it. Outside smelled almost as bad as inside. Horse manure and something pungent like rotten eggs mixed with rotting fish was so strong on the air that she could taste it, and the fog was so thick she could feel it on her skin. The street was bustling with people dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Some of them looked ragged and half-starved, and all of them cast Sandy a look of utter surprise, staring at her puffer coat, her jeans, and most of all, her furry snow boots. This was all wrong. This couldn't be a film set. It was too real. Her stomach clenched and fear crept up her spine as she finally realised the impossible truth. It wasn't a movie set. and it wasn't a dream. She wasn't capable of dreaming this. Somehow, as unbelievable and impossible as it seemed, she had travelled back in time. Giving in to the stench-fueled nausea, she threw up on the pavement. A woman was passing at the time cursed as some of the vomit spattered the ragged hem of her long skirt. As Sandy straightened back up and tried her best not to cry, a grubby-faced boy appeared at her side. "Looks like you had a good dinner then. Shame it's on the pavement now, though," he said with a wide, friendly smile. Well, that's the end of chapter 4. I hope you decide to join us again for chapter 5